Welcome back, episode 14. Wow, and 12 days. Oh, throwing my clapperboard around. That'll have made a nice sound. I usually put it down nice and gently, but I decided to throw it off this week. Yeah, 12 days into Christmas already, or 12 days into December. Feels like we are flying through. But for those of you tuning back in, welcome back to New Levels Coaching Podcast. We're the endurance podcast that brings the endurance world lots of information, education, and inspiration so you can literally take that away and run with it. This week, I am joined again by NLC Head of Coaching, Jethro McGraw.
Afternoon, Lewis. How are you? You good?
Yeah, I was going to say it is afternoon, isn't it? I was just checking my watch. I am good. I am good.
Episode 14.
14.
Yeah, it's quite a significant jump now.
3 appearances for you so far?
Yes, 3rd appearance.
Oh, wow.
Great to be back.
It's getting up to almost 25% ratio, guest ratio. But I'm excited to have Jethro in, and the reason for that, a couple of reasons. One, Jethro has been out to Euro cross country this weekend, which was fantastic. We'll touch on that a lot more as we go. Gemma was also potentially going to be here. Gemma's a little bit under the weather, so the run-in through Christmas and New Year episode will have to wait. So Jethro has kindly stepped up to the plate, and our reflections on Euro cross have come at a very relevant time, because for those of you who did tune in, that was on Sunday. But before we kick off, how was Brussels as a trip?
I had a great weekend. Headed out with a couple of the coaches down in Birmingham. Headed out, had a really nice weekend. It was brilliant, just soaking up that Sunday atmosphere. It was my first Eurocross, and yeah, it just really impressed. And I think the thing that you agreed with, because when you said you went to Ireland a couple of years ago, is that the day just goes by in a flash. It's one awesome race after the other, and especially one of the athletes that I work with was out there. So again, it was making sure that seeing them before and after the race, and it just made for a very, very busy day. But yeah, got back very tired, but full of energy now that Lewis has asked me to come and sit on this podcast, really. But yeah.
Well, firstly, congratulations for having an athlete. I know it's a big achievement for a coach to be named in that GB team as a coach, which is great. And Zoe, was it?
Yeah, extremely proud of her first GB vest, and I think it's just awesome to see somebody really have a performance that surpasses all expectations and make a GB team. And you realise how amazing and special that is, and what a GB team to make, a record-breaking GB team, which we'll come on to a little bit later.
Yeah, super exciting times for the GB cross team in particular, and the GB team as a whole. But yeah, well done to Zoe as well, because I know she'll be made up with making that team, and to coach, and to Matt Long as well, who was a guest last week on our podcast, one of the other coaches at NLC, who also had an athlete out there, Jess, and just got me thinking, you were out there with Dean Miller. We're going to have to pull Dino into the pod one week. I'm sure you'll love that. I love a chat with Dean. But Dave, our physiologist and coach at New Levels Coaching, was also out there as part of the Birmingham team as well. So he has a big input over at Birmingham. And we definitely need Dave on in the new year for a physiology podcast, because I feel like that would be one that our listeners can really tune into.
You've held into it now, so it'll be on in the new year.
Dave, if you're listening, you should be listening. If you are listening, we will have you on in the new year. We do have a physiology workshop as part of our runner retreats camps and workshops that we deliver. And in 2024, we've got a physiology workshop coming up, which is going to be held at Birmingham Uni. So a big shout out to Birmingham, and a big thanks to them for helping with that. And it is one of a kind, really, because we're going to put people through their paces with a step test on the track. So we're going to test them at different paces. We're going to look at their lactate profile, give them a full lactate analysis. But what Jethro and the team at Birmingham are doing very cleverly is they're adding wave-like technology into it. So we're actually going to have wave-like pacing for our runners, which is super cool. And I believe you're testing that on Thursday.
It's so unique. You might have seen, for those that are listening, you might have seen on a lot of the track races this summer that they've got that kind of the wave-like technology, which effectively it's like a pacemaker for the pacemakers, where the athletes can just sit on the pace, and that's guided by the lights. We've got that technology down in Birmingham, so yeah, it should be awesome. It's really useful for those kind of sessions as well, where the pace is really specific to what you're trying to get out of the session. So yeah,
nice. That's going to be in the dark as well, isn't it? I'm super jealous.
Yeah, Yeah,
I'm almost tempted to come across and watch them. It's cool when you see it at like Highgate and it gets dark and they have it on, and and they have it in Diamond Leagues as well. And it's kind of caused a little bit of controversy whether it should be there, whether it shouldn't be there. I'm all for it. I think anything that adds to the entertainment of the sport and helps with faster performances, why not? You know, other sports do exactly the same. Golf, they want to hit the golf ball as far as they can do. You know, so why aren't we doing the same in athletics? Well, thankfully we do have things like Wave Light, and hopefully it's here to stay. Well, Euro Cross Country is where we're kicking off this week. And if you're tuning in thinking, oh, I didn't realise it was on, you can go back and watch it on Catch Up. It's on the red button, so it's a really good event to watch. GB notoriously do pretty well at European Cross Country. And Jethro and I were having a conversation in the office earlier this morning and just reflecting on the weekend. There was also Telford 10K at the weekend, as well as many other races around the country and around the world were going on. And we thought, you know what, let's carry on this conversation in the podcast studio, because we think there's a lot that our listeners can take from the European Cross Country and the elites in general, because we talk a lot, don't we, about what could you learn from the elites. They are the role models. They are the people who set the example. And sometimes I think people look at elites and think, I can't take something away from them because I'm not at their level, but there's a lot you can take away from them that they do so well that would benefit our listeners. So we'll go on to that in kind of the second part, but let's kick off with what you said is now historically the most successful GB team at a European cross country, I believe.
Yeah, it was super impressive out there. What, three individual gold medalists, the team's podium in every event apart from the senior men's, and yeah, it was amazing to see. I think GB really did dominate on a course that was really tough, proper cross country course, if that makes sense. But yeah, really tough, and it was nice to. I like to pride myself in positioning myself on a cross country course in the most strategic position on the course, and so. We place ourselves on the backfield where the kind of the double hill. You could see the athletes taking on that every single lap, and it was a lap course, so up to four to 6 laps in total, and you could really see how much that was taken out of the athletes lap on lap, and yeah,
interesting. So the viewpoint then that you went for. Was it visible to the eye that you could see almost when people were braking, and you know, could you almost tell like a lap out, oh, that's starting to look a bit tough, is it biting? Was it that visible on the course?
Definitely. It's amazing just looking at the gaps that athletes allow to grow, or maybe the gaps that they're putting on the people that they're running with. You can see who's feeling good, and that might not be over the first lap or two, but you can certainly in those middle laps you can see who's feeling good, because especially in those middle laps it's a real balance of feeling good and wanting to push on, but also remaining patient, knowing that there's still a heck of a long way to go. That's one of the beauties of a cross country compared to a distanced track or road race, is that you've really got to judge. You've got no. Although there is a distance, it's the course that you have to judge your effort on, not the duration. Because just because something's 5K does not mean necessarily you can predict how long that's going to take you.
I love that. I think I'll be honest. I wasn't the biggest fan of cross country growing up, even though I did have some success on the cross. And I think as I've gotten older and more technology's come around, and as we were saying, I'm a big fan of technology, but there's something about cross country now for me that it makes it a level playing field when you can take a lot of that technology out, or it becomes less relevant. And what I mean by that is things like the carbon shoes don't play as much of a part. The watch doesn't play as much of a part, as you were saying. It's really hard to gauge like splits. Somebody told me that Matt Stonier in the under-23 race, he got a bronze medal, was won by Will Barnacote from Birmingham Uni. They were running around 5:40 minute miling, which for some of our listeners, that's going to sound insanely quick. But to put that into perspective, you know, these are guys who'd go and run 10Ks at closer to 4:30 minute miling. So it's way down on what you'd expect the pace to be, but you've got to run the course and you've got to run the conditions. And that is what I love about cross country, in the sense is it's so unique, it's so pure. It's that part of the sport that is still pure, where it's just, you've got to judge your effort, you've got to judge the heart and lungs, you've got to judge the legs. So much comes into play. And I think that's what made it exciting at the weekend. It was a mud bath, but it just added to it, didn't it?
It's a pure race, and I know in previous podcasts we've discussed around for certain races, obviously as much specific training needs to be incorporated into a program as possible, but often you don't quite know the type of course you're going to get at certain cross countries. And actually on Sunday, the rain held off until the end of the day. It was due for forecast to be torrential all day, and you could imagine that would have even changed the shape and the results of the day. And that might have worked for or against GB in those conditions. But yeah, it's super interesting. And although the teams are there they get there the day before and walk the course and try and understand what it might look like, the reflection from a few of them was that actually after a day of rain on the Saturday, the course looked very different to how it did on the Saturday morning. And so you're right, it probably takes them a full lap to really understand what does this course feel like, how can I best judge my effort. And you could see those that had judged their effort well, and that's probably a lessons learned that can apply to lots of people at home that we might come on to a little bit later, around trusting your feeling and not worrying about the pace. The watch really doesn't matter.
It was fascinating to watch even the lines people were trying to pick, trying to pick up the better ground, but they were having to go wide for that. And I was watching it and I was thinking, I'm the type of person who that might fall into that category where I'd look for the better ground. But it was quite visible on the TV, and I don't know if it was as visible on course, that they were just costing themselves so much time because they were having to go so wide to get that better ground. And Paula picked up on it. She said, look, they think they're doing better by going and getting a better ground, but actually they're running so wide, it's probably detrimental. The counterbalance of that was, were they saving their legs for later on in the race so that their legs didn't get zapped as much? But it was all this this balancing act and people coming up with their own strategy. And you've just hit the nail on the head. They're doing that whilst in the race. And I think that's one of the big learnings I want to get across to people is you can change strategy in a race. You can listen to the body. You can look at the conditions. What happens if the conditions change drastically within a race? You've got to be able to think on your feet.
Absolutely. And for those that, wouldn't be aware, so the athletes, they wouldn't warm up on the course before the race, and so really the only time, it's only when the gun goes and they're able to head out on the course, that's the only real time where they're going to fully understand what it feels like to run at pace around that kind of profile.
That's a really good point that a lot of our listeners probably won't be aware of. They don't warm up on the course because you can't really. No, it's hard. It's all roped off and those sort of things.
But it makes you realise, applying that to, let's say, it's not quite the same, but how many times have athletes said to you before a 10K or a marathon, I just want to run something on a profile that's very similar to the course at pace, just for my own confidence, and you realise, well, I know it's slightly different, but all the athletes there have never ran on that exact course before the race, and just got to deal with it. It's a level playing field in that regard.
Yeah, I totally get it from a confidence point of view, where people want to feel similar to what they're going to feel in a race, and I get it. We've all been there. I've been there myself, and I'm not going to say I've made that mistake, because I think some people do get confidence from it. But where I draw the line is, well, how much of it are we going to replicate? Are we going to replicate the footwear you're going to go in? Are we going to replicate the kit? Are you going to have the same meal the night before? Are you going to go to bed at the same time? It's impossible to do all that. And Alex, who's one of our coaches at NLC and was my former coach, my last coach that I had before I stopped running competitively, he used to say to me, look, it just comes down to who the fittest person is, who's the most well-trained on the day, and then who applies the best race strategy. But ultimately, it's not going to be the person who's gone out and ran in the wind if it's a windy day. And I used to love that. Yeah. It's not the person who's trained best in the wind who's going to win when it's windy. Yeah. It's and I thought that was a really good way of looking at it. But linked to that as well. So, like I said, I was viewing it at home, and it was quite obvious that people were picking their strategy within the race. But you mentioned there something we might touch on, that people were starting to get that feeling within the race of potentially backing off, maybe saving something in the second half. One thing I noticed was, and I sometimes thought this was like a bit of a myth really, that you can finish strong on a course like that. I used to look at it and think, well, if you're out the race, you're not getting back because it's so boggy. Mm-hmm. But it looked like people were putting in big efforts on the last lap and really making up a lot of ground. And likewise, there were some people who were swimming on that last lap and really going back over. Was that something that you noticed on the course itself? What were the things you picked up on?
I think one of the things that I picked up on was that there was for quite a few people it did pay off if you wanted to come in and around that 10th to 15th place, and that was your kind of target, that it paid to kind of back off at the start a little bit and run a much more conservative race strategy. I'm gonna call out one of my mentors, Luke Gunn. So congratulations, one of his athletes, Poppy, ran in the senior women's race.
Poppy Tank,
and we were discussing last night, and I just said, like, huge congrats. Obviously, the two of them had got their race strategy right on point. And she did start really conservatively, I think 44th on lap 1.
Right.
And finished 12th overall. So
Amazing.
Every lap. And that's significant because it's not a big field. So 44th would be a fair way down the
almost
field.
At the back of that women's field.
Absolutely. And it requires patience as well, because that kind of strategy, just because you go off a little bit smoother at the start, and those athletes don't immediately come back to you, but you got to keep the faith, stick to your plan, and in the end it did really pay off because they were able to come through and race really well.
That's a fascinating point, because one, we talk a lot about trusting the process, and that is the epitome of it. Like, trust that process, that my coach has got this right. I believe I can still make up this, even though people aren't coming back to me maybe as soon as I thought. There's a long way to go, and you do get a bit nervous with that, but you've got to bide your time. But what I find really fascinating about it was when you mentioned if you had a strategy that you wanted to finish maybe inside the top 20, even maybe sneak in the top 10, then this was a really good strategy for you. But what you didn't say was, if you wanted to medal or win the race, you can then apply that same strategy. And that's exactly what I took from it. If you wanted to medal or be right up the front, you kind of had to be there.
Yeah, I would agree. There wasn't a huge amount of movement in that top 10. Probably the senior men's race was the one where there was the most movement, and so one of the longest distances on the day. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's really interesting because obviously we went. I was at the trial event for the GB team 2 weeks previous, and it's just a very different environment. Everyone there is looking to make the team, and they're effectively racing each other. You put them in that European context. Everyone's got their own aims and expectations, and with a deeper field, a different course, it really shows who's been strategic, where people's strengths are, and yeah, I think I got a really good sense of what it takes to win somewhere like that, but also what it takes to come top 10, top 15, top 25, and in future with an athlete there, you might be able to best advise them as to what result they want to get out of it.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pick out any specific bad examples of that, but you can watch the Eurocross and you can see them for yourself, where people potentially go out a bit too hard and then pay the price. And again, been there, done that, and paid the price. So I know it's a strategy that I personally wouldn't employ, and some people get away with it. They go off and they're brave and they stick with it, and maybe that's their mentality. If I'm going to medal, I need to get up there, and I'm going to give myself every shot to do that.
And some races it works, right? And that's what we're trying to say. That some races that is really important, and that is applicable, and but it's the danger is applying that uniformly.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So with that, there was cross countries again back at home. It was my county cross country, which I've done, and actually you can hold me accountable to this one, Jethro, and our listeners can as well. I do want to do a cross country, but by the time the year is out, the racing year is out. So the cross country calendar usually ends around March time. I'd really like to do one, so I'm gonna
national cross.
Oh, when's that? That's a good point.
End of Feb.
Yeah. Do we know where it is this year? Shrewsbury. Okay, so not too far either. Oh, well, I might have to see if we've got any workshops in the calendar to get myself out of that one.
For people that are interested, anybody with a affiliated with the EA can enter that event. We have our run club, which if you are affiliated with us,
plug here, Jethro.
You can enter that national cross event. But that's amazing. This sort of the flagship biggest race, the senior men's attracts a field of around 1,400, 1,500 runners of all abilities every year, and yeah, is a real spectacle.
I might throw my hat in for that. I'll have a look. But yeah, Jethro's right. If you want to run National Cross, or your Northern, your Southern, your Midland Cross, if you're affiliated to a club, then you can enter those through the club, which is great. If you're not a member of a club, you can always check out the New Levels Run Club. We're a virtual run club. We're an online run club. We have 2 levels of subscription. We have a first claim members, where you would be first claim for new levels, which is great. We'd love you to be part of that. But if you're already a member of a running club and you want to join another one, then you can join us second claim. And there's loads of benefits from being in our community. We get lots of partners discounts. You get a free vest thrown in there. You get a run through place thrown in there too. But you do become part of this team, and a lot of people who do run individually sometimes don't know about that. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. National Cross, yeah, we had the first stage of that almost then. So let's backtrack. So National's like the pinnacle. Mm-hmm. You've got the Northerns, the Southerns, the Midlands, and then right back you've got then your counties. Mm-hmm. And my county's quite unique, whereby we have our county champs prior to Christmas, which is quite unique. There's some others. This weekend I've got an athlete racing theirs before Christmas as well. But most of them fall January 6th, January 7th, I believe, this year. And then you go from that and you progress through the stages. But the point I'm getting to here is that you can get into these cross countries at any level. And they all have similarities to what we saw at the weekend, because I looked at the Northeastern Cross and my God, you thought Brussels was bad. You should have seen this one.
I've seen some photos actually. Yeah.
Did you? Yeah. And so I wanted to kind of touch on that. So what did we learn from the weekend, and what do we know about cross country that our listeners can take from it? And some people will be sat there going, well, I've never done a cross country. I don't really know where to start. So I'm going to put something in the hat to kick us off. Footwear. What were people wearing at the weekend that our listeners maybe are familiar with or aren't familiar with in terms of footwear on the feet?
So yeah, everyone on the weekend was wearing spikes. Back at you though, I think with the advancements of a lot of the trail running shoes, a lot of the rock claws, the mud claws, like the studs, you'd find in a lot of kind of more regional, local, county competitions that people are more than able to compete. My partner actually, she races in trail shoes because they work best for her. So yeah, there is a real mix. I think the headline is though, you need some grip.
Yeah, definitely. Grippy shoes. But you won't believe this, Jethro. So James, who I coach, James Tilley, who's gone to the trails recently, he is going to do some cross-country after Christmas. Okay. And he said, yeah, I've got some spikes. I'm just going to wear my Dragonflies, which most people do these days. They seem to just think, well, I'll just run in them. And he said, yeah, I don't need any of the spikes in the bottom, do they? They've got spikes in the bottom. And I said, yeah, you're probably going to need longer ones, James. He goes, oh, do they do longer ones? And it kind of was quite refreshing that, he's still relatively new to the sport. But it got me thinking, like, a lot of people don't know about the spikes and the different size spikes, and also like the trail shoe option. Mm-hmm.
So I think 15 mil are the largest.
15, yeah.
They are the largest. So yeah, they're quite sizable and can do some damage. Without wanting to sidetrack too much, one of the athletes that I worked with in a previous race unfortunately fell at the start and got stamped on, and that was quite a nasty cut. But anyway, yeah, so cross country tends to be people race between 12 to 15 millimeter spikes, and on the track it tends to be around 6 mil. Yeah. I think some tracks actually wouldn't allow any longer than that anyway, and there's not really a lot of benefit. So yeah, but you can obviously take the physical spikes out of the bottom of your shoe, replace them, and so you can use spikes on both the track and the cross, just with different. The physical shoe with a different size spikes in the plate at the bottom.
But what we're saying about all these things is grip. Those spikes, the length of them, depending on how bad the course is, the worse the course, the longer the spike is general rule of thumb. You're trying to get grip. Spikes are a bit lighter than trail shoes. Some people prefer them to be lighter. But as you said, your partner quite rightly goes with a shoe that's more comfortable for her, which is a trail shoe. And trail running shoes have advanced so much now that we're in a good position where you can wear them. I know Kirsty does exactly the same, Coach Kirsty, who has been running a lot of cross this year as well. So if you're thinking about cross-country, footwear is something that you might want to think about. And your choice of footwear, make sure you have good grip on that. I think it's just fun as well. It's just good. It just mixes it up. It's a hard effort. It's nice to change it up. It's a bit of softer ground as well, so it adds that element to it. And also, something you touched on already, again, going back to Eurocross this weekend, the team element. Often if you're running for a club, it's not that you're just running as an individual. You can often contribute towards a team, and sometimes that team scoring points, and that goes towards league points as well. So the weekend, how many people are there, thinking, right, I'm here as an individual? Of course they are. But what have they got to think about if they're going, well, actually, this could affect the team score as well?
Absolutely. And I think that's the other element of cross country where it is around resilience and toughness. And I think a nice way to think about it is sometimes in a 10K, the first, or a road race, the first portion of the race can feel quite smooth. You can feel pretty good. I'd say with cross country, it never does. It often feels it feels hard right from the start. And so having that team element where you're not just there for yourself, but you're there for a greater cause, really does help. And it helps you to kind of grit or grind out those couple of tough Ks, miles, minutes in the middle of the race where you do need that extra bit of emphasis. But yeah, you could see the guys that were running on at the weekend strategically for the team as well. The Belgians won the senior men's race, which is awesome. Home turf, and they got the biggest cheer of the day. Quite rightly, it was a great event they put on, and it was amazing that the last race of the day that they clinched that team title. But they ran as a pack. There was 3-4 of them that for the first 2 laps they were all running together, and you could see that they obviously had a strategy that they just needed to put as many of them in the top 10 as possible, and that was going to be their strategy. One of them actually pushed on and eventually got the bronze medal, but he ran with that team, and you could see that was a thing that they were most definitely running for. I think if it had just been him as an individual, I reckon he might have ran slightly differently. That's the beauty of the kind of team element, I suppose.
That's a really nice point as well, because I think everyone can relate to running a team and running together. And like you're saying, you can even have team strategy. So you can be there as an individual, but you might have a team strategy as well. Mm-hmm. I remember my good friend Ryan McLeod, who was training partner with at the time, he said there was a point at the Eurocross where him and Tom Lancashire were running together on the GB team, and they were sat in around about 12th, 13th. I can't remember exactly where it was. And Tom had kind of calculated that they needed to get past the 2 guys in front. I believe it was the French guys in front of them who were sat in like 10th and 11th. And Tom just got to Ryan and said, look, if we get those 2 guys, we're going to win gold. And they ran together to try and get past the French guys to win that gold medal. And I think it's a really good example of when you're in it for more than just yourself, but you want that gold as well, but you want the team to benefit from it. And this can happen at any level. This is the beauty of it. And this is why I like those team events. And I think this is what cross country gives us, as opposed to like going and doing a marathon or something like that, whereby you can be part of something bigger, whether that's just a social occasion, getting together, or whether it's actually competing for county medals as a team that you might contribute towards, or it might be something like a national medal, like you say, because a national medal for a lot of our club athletes as a team is huge, isn't it? But it's that team element that really brings people together.
Absolutely, and I'm sure those slightly different. I know that Valencia was an amazing experience for New Levels as a community, and I'm sure that there was a lot of individuals that really rose to that kind of camaraderie out there, and that helped with their own individual performances to go out there, represent and be part of something.
And I think you're spot on. I think when you feel like you're part of something, part of a community, part of a club, and they're on the sidelines cheering you on, it makes a big difference. And I noticed that, the support looked incredible, by the way. That, especially that men's race at the end where Belgium were coming through strong. Was the noise electric by that point?
Yeah, noise was massive. Especially in that last race, it was a frantic last lap, but they knew it was on.
People feeding off that as well, which I think is important. But again, linking that to learnings, not getting carried away with that is important. Mm-hmm. You mentioned about the Belgians packing well. There's a big lesson there for our listeners. It's easy to get carried away with whatever race you're in, particularly those big races, big marathons, big Ironmans, those real big occasions, trail races where there's loads of people there at the start. They go mental, all the cowbells are ringing, you're getting really excited and you get carried away and you get dragged into a pace that you shouldn't be going. He's a really nice example, actually, of the Belgian guys who could have easily got carried away in front of a home crowd, but had a strategy. They had the sense to stick to that strategy, and it paid off, didn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's been nice reflecting, actually, a couple of days after the event, just thinking about what we saw out there. But I imagine it was the same. I imagine it's the same in Ireland. I know when you went a couple of years ago, again, really the crowd really getting behind the Irish team, and you can see that right across all sorts of cross-country events that it really is powerful.
Yeah, Ireland is one of my best places to go for running. They love their running in Ireland. They really do. I know rugby's like their national sport, but they get behind certain sports, like boxing's big in Ireland, and running is big in Ireland. I remember the senior women's team that Ava Hutchinson was part of, Ava Haynes now, who's married to Alex Haynes, who I mentioned earlier. She was part of the Irish women's team that won the Eurocross, and they won Team of the Year at Irish Sports Personality of the Year. So they were selected as the Team of the Year, which shows how much the nation get behind their athletes. Fionnuala McCormack had a ridiculously good run. For me, that was run of the weekend. She ran 2:26 in Valencia just last weekend, and then the following weekend goes and finishes 4th at the European Cross Country Champs, which is incredible. Which leads me on to my next point, which you've already mentioned, running to feel and knowing your body and understanding your body. He's a really good example of, let's just put it bluntly, one of the older athletes in the field, if not potentially the oldest athlete in that women's field. So she's been around a long time. She's got experience, but obviously age isn't on her side in terms of recovery. She runs a marathon the week before. She then goes to Eurocross, which some people would say, well, that's bananas. And she runs fantastically well. There's got to be a lot of running to feel there and understanding it. I didn't see her strategy from the TV. I hadn't quite figured it out, and I'm not sure that I was kind of looking for it, to be honest. You said that you'd picked her out quite early, and she did quite clearly go off in control, and she wasn't featuring. So was that a feel-based move, do you think, from Fionnuala?
I mean, I wouldn't like to say, but I suspect it looked like it was, I'll get out there, I'll see how I feel, and if I feel good, then I can push on. And it did look like she was feeling good. I wouldn't like to guess what a routine between Valencia and Eurocross was, but it just goes to show as well how important that feeling is. And how many times do we feel kind of overwhelmed when there's a certain session or race that you've got to do, and you kind of say, well, how fast do I have to run? What does that mean? What time? And you wouldn't be able to guess what that first mile might look like on Sunday. So yeah, very different to Valencia, where I'm sure there was much more of a specific paced racing strategy, whereas Sunday was a bit more, entirely opposite. But obviously had a huge amount of success in both. And it just goes to show, if you're fit, you're fit. You're fit.
Yeah, I agree. Let's dissect that a little bit, and I hope you don't mind me asking this around kind of strategy with your athletes for cross country, because I'll delve into a little bit of Valencia. There are specific pacing strategies for the marathon, and that does usually involve splits for the majority of people. Sometimes it doesn't always have to, but there is a conversation we had beforehand of certainly a pace range that you're looking to go, and that's often based on the goal target time and looking at breaking down the splits. For me, I like to work in 5K sections. What our 5K split's going to look like. The watch is obviously there to help, and then you can measure that on the course as well. Cross country is very different. Splits don't even really come into it. In fact, you see from the athletes, not many of them do even wear their watch in cross country, because it's totally irrelevant. They're not really looking at that. And I think that's a big thing that I want to get across to our listeners, maybe who do wear their watch in cross country and are looking at pace. It's probably something that you're going to have to get away from, because it's really hard to compare your pace on the roads to cross country. But they're probably sat there thinking, well, how do I come up with a strategy? Like, what sort of things do I need to be thinking about? Like, what sort of conversations were you having with the athletes you coach, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, absolutely not. I think first of all, you've got to understand what your strengths are as an athlete. I think they're the same across all distances and race types. And you've got to, when you first see a cross country course, you've got to understand, right, well, which bits are a positive and which bits play into my strengths, and which bits are potentially things that aren't necessarily my strength. And I would hazard a guess there's not many people that rock up at a cross-country course and say every single metre is exactly me. That's perfect for me.
It's a good point. That's a really good
got
point.
Their own little sections where they're like, I could probably really come into my own, or I could recover really well in this section. Now, the race on Sunday was laps, so I suppose you could use laps as a marker. But actually, I think I don't particularly like that, because I think those laps are not going to be ran evenly, and so it's not an even distribution of time spent. And so I prefer to break the race down for the athlete into sections that make sense, sections that the start may contain just literally be the first half mile, and then the middle section might be the next 2 miles, but they're sections that the athlete understands. They understand how they should be feeling through that kind of phase. And also, for example, if you know that an athlete has a really strong finish, no matter how tough it is, then you can almost create 2 finish lines, one with 600 meters to go and one, do your thing and finish really strongly. So it really does vary. It's absolutely athlete specific, and probably more so than, or as much as the track and the road running, in that that plan could be very different based on the course, even if it's the exact same athlete with the exact same strengths. I'm sure if me and you raced, we'd have very different perspectives on the same course, and that it just goes to show that that the outcome could be similar, could be very different, but the way that you achieve it is entirely individualized.
A couple of interesting points there, really interesting, and one big learning from me. Often I probably fall into the trap of, even as a coach, of saying, oh, that course isn't really suited to them. But actually, you're right. It might be that as a whole, the course isn't suited to them, but there's going to be certain sections that are. So how can you dissect that further and have a look at how you can use those sections to help you? Definitely. The other thing that I really liked about that was like breaking it down into parts, and the one bit I wanted to touch on was the two finishes. So what you were saying there was like the athlete's going to finish strong regardless, and we're talking over like the last 150 meters. So you were almost saying, right, well, we're going to extend that. We're going to look at a second finish, which is like 600 meters out, maybe 800 meters out, where actually you go a little bit earlier because we know you're going to finish anyway. So can you put it in a little bit further from the finish? Is that what you're alluding to there?
I think so. I mean, it's great having a strong finish, but if you're not next to anybody in a race that's all about the race, it's not about the time, then actually that's not a really very well placed sprint finish, and so it's about putting yourself in a position to really make the most of where your strengths are. There was a lot of people with mountain running, fell racing backgrounds racing on Sunday as well, and I'm sure that they had race plans and strategies that meant that they were really focusing on using their ability on the uphill or the really steep downhills to maybe just get an extra second or two, just put an extra meter into somebody else that's then they've got to cover that move, and just generally that that your competitors are responding rather than being they're being reactive rather than active in what they're doing. And just those like little subtle things, lap on lap, are the things that eventually sap your rivals, and that's the best way for you to make the most of what you need to do.
Chris Thompson, who coached me at some point in my career, he used to describe that finish that you're describing as spreading your butter evenly across the toast. He used to say, look, you got your toast, and the aim is to spread that butter nice and evenly across the toast. He said, what you don't want to do is put too much butter on one end and then have nothing left at the end, or have nothing on the first bit and have it all left at the end. And I thought it was a really good analogy that I used to resonate with me. And I used to fall into the trap of having too much butter at the end, like having everything left, but like you alluded to there, almost nobody to catch. Yep. So he was saying, well, let's set it up a little bit. Let's give yourself the chance. And what I really liked about that strategy, and if people are thinking about maybe trying it themselves, was he made it, he was very honest with me when he said, look, I don't care if you fall apart. Look, I want to find your limit. I don't want you to finish fast in this race. It almost took the pressure off me. If you're finishing like a train, that we've not got it right.
Yep.
And what it meant was I really kind of went for it. Mm-hmm. And I still did finish fast, but just not as fast as what I maybe had done before. But he was saying we just want to find that tipping point. Mm-hmm. And I really liked the way he kind of described that. Something else you said there, which is a point I wanted to go on about different people's strengths and specialities. You touched on the fell, mountain runners. Mm-hmm. So last year at Eurocross, if you remember rightly, it was in Italy, I believe, and they had this crazy course where they ran through like a museum and stuff like that. But as you came out of that museum, there was a really steep downhill, and it was quite obvious who the kind of good downhill runners were. They made up good ground in that section. And I remember watching the commentary, and I'm pretty certain it was a French athlete again, where this French athlete had specifically targeted the Eurocross because they come from like that mountain background. And I think that's a really nice point to make here. And again, the beauty of cross country is if you're clever, you can actually look at races. Like there are certain races, like you say, where you can break down even further into sections, but there are certain races that are going to suit you. And you can almost pick your little winners and pick your goals right back to your episode we did right at the start. Yep. Have a look at those big A goals and see where they are.
And use your C goals, like you said with Tomo, just to experiment a little bit and see what you've got. And that might be a different distance or a different type of course. And maybe there's like a strength that you didn't know you had, but you needed to go and run a race that tried something different in order to discover that is actually a strength.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like using those other races, like we spoke about, those seagulls to try things or figure things out where you might not think it's a strength, but how do you know if you don't try it? It could well be. Yeah, and there's loads of opportunities for that. That's where it's quite nice, where you can use cross country if you've never done it before. How do you know if you're not good at it? You might never done it before, but you can mix your season up as well. Some people like to do that. I know Tyler, one of the guys you coach, and Joe, they recently ran like the short course at Liverpool. I think they raced even earlier than that at Cardiff as well. And then I seen them on the road over 10K at Telford at the weekend, showing how they're mixing their season up. And I assume they might even go indoors in the new year, will they? Maybe experiment with the indoors?
To be confirmed next 2 weeks. But yeah, they'll probably go indoors. But yeah, you're right. You can... like I said earlier, if you're fit, you're fit. But as long as there's a plan in place of a broad structure of where you want to go and the type of things that you want to be doing, and you do enough specificity that equates to the big goals that you've got, then actually you can navigate things, and that is the beauty. And I think that is where it's useful to have like a companion coming on that journey with you. Speaking to somebody even just this morning who got goals, everything from 5K to ultras, and it's about, okay, that's fine, both those are possible and all those goals are possible, but what makes sense and how can we get you there in a path that keeps you healthy, keeps your progression in the sport logical. And cross country can be quite a flexible part of that because of its variety and profile, race quality, race distance, time of the year as well. To be fair, a race in October where the ground's still pretty firm is a bit different to a national cross in February where it's guaranteed to be pretty muddy.
It's a really good point about the time of year, because I met with a good friend of mine yesterday who's coached by Kirsty at New Levels, and he specialises in triathlon now, but I used to coach him running wise, and we talked about that time of year around, like, there's not many triathlons around now, of course. So there might be triathletes out there who are looking at, well, where can I race? And that's where things like cross country or road racing come into it. But ultimately, you kind of beat me to the long-term plan thing around we should never deviate too far away from our long-term plan and where our A goals sit. And you should always have that in the kind of the back of the mind, even though these races might be coming very much at the forefront. Because I think it's easy now, and Matt mentioned this on a podcast a while ago, that we can get drawn into kind of every race under the sun, especially with clubs. And that's not saying clubs are a bad thing at all. I'm a massive fan of the club scene in the UK in particular. But I do think the danger is 1 week there's a road race, the next week there's a cross country, then there's a midweek 5K, and all of a sudden you're racing every week and you're not training. And I think that is the danger where we've got this full calendar. So I think it's a really good point you make around planning those goals in.
But on the flip side, it's okay to have 4 weeks where you say, actually, I'm just going to do a load of racing. It doesn't really mean a lot, but just be honest about what that is. As long as that's an active decision rather than a passive, I'll just go for another one and do this and do that. Like one of the athletes that I'm working with has just said, look, before I start my marathon block, I just want to play around and just do a load of things, enjoy my running and do loads of easy running in between. But that's fine. And that we know that's factored in, and he'll be a lot more specific once that marathon block starts. But for the time being, go and have some fun, do some cross countries and see what happens.
I'm sure I've used this quote before, but I'm going to use it again because I love it so much. But it comes back to that point of, like, if you're taking action without any goals, then you're literally just you're living like a nightmare. But if you've got goals and you're not taking action, then you're just dreaming. Like, so the goal without the action, it's just a dream. You're not actually taking action towards it. But if you're taking action without a goal, that leads to a nightmare situation because it's not purposeful. You're just doing things for the sake of doing it. And I always relate it to, like, you wouldn't get in your car and not know where you're going and just start driving around. Why would you do that? There's an end goal there. And I think that's the trap people fall into when you said about racing. There's nothing wrong with going through a spell of racing if it's purposeful practice, if it's in there, you know why you're doing it, what the intention of those races are, whether they're training, whether they're actual races. I think they're actually...
Or fun.
Yeah, just having a bit of social fun. But I think there's the temptation to overdo that, but there's the temptation of going back to what you said on the first ever podcast we did together, whereby you think you should be performing at your best every single week, and that just isn't possible.
Mm-hmm. I like that summary. I've not heard that one before.
Have you not?
No, that's good.
It's like
nothing to add from me. That was concisely put. So
it's like I don't know if it's like a proverb or something that I've heard before, but someone said it to me and it just resonated with me straight away. It's like, yeah, it's all right, people saying they've got goals, but are they actually taking action towards it? But then vice versa, we see it so many times where people are just doing things and they're just caught in this circle of, oh, well, I don't really know where I'm going. And that's often when we see plateaus in performance with people. And I'd say that's one thing that coaching provides often is sometimes, I'm going to let you into a little secret here, people. Sometimes the coaching itself is not rocket science. It's quite simple. It's quite basic. But some of the tweaks we make as coaches when we work with people comes outside of the training, where it's actually, let's have a look at those goals and where they sit. What are you actually aiming for? And you look at it and you go, well, actually, you're not aiming towards anything. And if we go full circle here and we go right back to where we started around what can we learn from the elites in this sport, is that there were people there at the weekend who were aiming for the medals and good positions. And this will have been a big target for them. Mm-hmm. It will have been put in the calendar early. They will have known they were aiming for it. Their training will have been specific for it. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, is one of the biggest learnings we can take. But let people into a bit of or give them a bit of an insight into now, Jeth, well, what might they now do after that? So what might their training look like now for a period of time? Or what might they be thinking now?
Good question. Good question. I think the majority will probably have a pretty easy week this week.
Yeah.
So rest and recovery again. There's a great podcast in terms of just making sure that you're rejuvenating. That was with Matt, right?
It was.
It was with Matt.
And again, it's like that word of rest and recovery. It scares people. Like, you're going to ask me to rest?
Go and do nothing for a week and come back refreshed. But it also gives them space to come back and reflect on.
Yeah.
Not just the outcome, but the process to get there. And has every day been purposeful and green, or has there been days where it's things have been orange or red and not quite on track? So so a period of rest and recovery, reflection, and then you'd assume that everyone the targets to make Eurocross is the end point of a block for most people, and they'll be going into a next block, potentially probably a rebuilding phase, and then probably into something a bit more specific in the spring, whether that's on the road, cross country, indoors. And that's the beauty of the Eurocross, is in the way it sits in the calendar. You do get a complete mix of individuals that are either aiming for it and it's very much on their agenda that they are likely going to make the team and then likely be up there in the top 10 medals. You've got others that are saying aspirationally, I just want to get as fit as possible, and you never know, I might make a team and then make the most of the opportunity while I'm out there. And then for others, it's just building blocks as to, it's fantastic to make a team, to be up there on the at the highest level in European athletics, and just learn something from that, and then refocus for whatever next or future goals are in the sport across 2024 and beyond.
That's a really nice point to wrap up on, I believe. Wrap up ready for Christmas. What I really like about that is that you're saying, look, whatever your aim was, whether it was to medal, whether it was just to be fit and hopefully make a team, there can be, excuse me, just coughing. you can have your own individual aims, but people are all at the same event trying to get out of it what they want to get out of it. But what they haven't fallen into the trap of, they haven't gone away from that aim that they set at the start of the year. And maybe they then reflect on it, and that helps them as we go into 2024. I love it. I'm having a bit of a coughing fit here. I don't know if I'm getting emotional wrapping things up for the year. Excuse me. So apologies for the coughing fit, but I thought it was a really nice place to wrap up. So thanks for making that point, Jethro. And I just wanted to share, going into 2024 then, maybe is a time for you to now reflect on 2023. Are you at a point where you've hit the end of that block? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not the end of the block. Maybe you're right in the middle of that block. But I always do think the end of year provides with an opportunity to just have a look at things, maybe chat to your coach if you've got a coach, or if you haven't, maybe write some things down. We always encourage our athletes to do that. Have a look at what you've learned. We did a really good podcast on our learnings as coaches. That will help shape things for the future year, but also start to have a look at where those goals might fit in 2024 and make sure that you're taking purposeful action towards those goals. Because if you're not, then remember that little saying that the goals are just dreams. You're not actually aiming towards them. They're just going to be sat there in your mind.
Yeah, and goals for action right through the year, not just January.
Yes, it's a good point. Yeah, you'll get your gym memberships reduced, and we'll have all those New Year's resolutions coming into play, and people will be getting fit in Jan, and then by February the gyms will be empty, and I will love it again because things will quieten down and it'll be back to normal. But yeah, I think just one thing we will leave you with that is, habits are formed by taking purposeful action for the right reasons. If you go into January just thinking, I'm just going to do it because it's January, that won't be a big enough motivation to get you through. However, if you enter something in maybe April or May time, something like a marathon, then starting now before January will just be part of the process. So you'll have that goal to aim for, and you'll have that purposeful practice that gives you that accountability towards that big goal that is coming in the springtime. So if you're thinking about getting fit in January, my advice would be, don't just wait for January. Why January? Start now, or start to think about it now, but also give yourself a goal to aim for that'll keep you accountable. I think we can wrap it up there. Yeah, happy with that? Yeah. So we've thank you. No, I really enjoyed that. I wanted to bring that conversation out of the office. We have some really good conversations in the office, and I sometimes say to the team, I wish we could have recorded that. So today I did put Jethro on the spot a little bit, and I'm very, very thankful that he's taken me up on the offer.
It's been fine.
Yeah, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I love chatting about these sort of things, and I think it's a really good way to give our audience an insight into not just our coaching brains, but the elite side of the sport, where they maybe watch it on TV, but we actually do reflect on it and shows what we learn from it as well. And hopefully it's provided people at home with something to learn from as well. So as always, we hope we see you out there racing and training. Best of luck with races if you've got them coming up with the festive period. We're going to wrap this new year up, going to wrap the year up before the new year with some running tips and hints through Christmas and New Year, and hopefully Gemma and I will be back next week to provide that, and we may take a little bit of a break from the podcast over the festive period, but if we do, we'll have some snapshots of the best that we've had to offer in 2023 as we plan ahead for 2024. So yeah, as always, keep running, stay healthy, stay fit, and we will see you all very, very soon. Thanks everyone.